Again, welcome to another year of Radio Entry Manitoba's presentation meetings. We hope to be doing this once a month, something of interest to some people at least, if not the majority of people. Tonight we have Gary Moyer is going to talk to us about radio in Winnipeg and how it came to be, etc., and a good history of it. Before we get any farther, though, I'd just like a moment of silence for hams who are no longer with us. Thank you. I want to start with introductions. We'll start with Colin in the back, please.
Colin V4 Charlie Sierra Tango.
Paul V4 Papa Lula.
Steph.
Dennis V4 UK.
Rob V4 RBB.
James V4 SNI.
Wyatt V4 Whiskey Delta Zulu.
Nicholas, VA4 NJF.
Jamie V4 GHD.
Jim V4 GZ.
Dick V4 Hotel Kilo.
Rosie V4 Emblemo.
Glenn V4 Golf Whiskey November.
Melissa.
Bill V4 BEF.
John V4 IM.
Jerry VE4 Victor Charlie. Whatever.
Steph VA4 SPT.
Mark VA4 MAJ.
Dan V4 Delta Radio Kilowatt.
Thank you. I am Derek, VE4HAY, Gary
Oh.
Moyer,
Hello,
and Andy.
this is Andy. Yeah,
Andy.
he's helping me out tonight. Yeah.
And who's
on
the
Online, we have Doug, VA4DUG, Bruce Johnson, VE4QK. KQ. Sorry, Doug. Fred TRO, Darren, VE4DMG, David, VE4DL, Jordan, VE4JLB, and Garth, VE4GWB. I'm assuming that's who that Garth is. What was I want to bring up? Next meeting is the only time of the year it happens that our meeting is on a holiday. It's Thanksgiving, so the meeting will be the following day on the Tuesday. Please mark your calendars, change it so one day later. Bring some turkey with you because we've all had enough by then. I'm sorry?
I said I know a lot of turkeys.
Yes. So please make note of that. Otherwise, the meetings we got lined up through to the end of the year. We have a Christmas party we're going to be doing at the Marigold Restaurant on Osborne Street. Yes, Osborne. On the normal meeting night, which is December something, I forget, 8th. Yeah. So that'll be there, and I forget the cost. Do you remember what the cost was?
It was $25.95 or something.
Yeah, something like that, plus taxes and gratuity, please. We can hold about 130 people in the room that they have there for us. So as many people as you want to bring along, please do. Other than that, we have some other programs lined up. They are all in the newsletter, which you should have received. If you haven't, please talk to, he's not here, he's in Scotland. So talk to Dan in the meantime about why you're not on the membership roll if you are a member. With that, I just want to get into Gary's introduction. Gary's had a career in broadcasting that spans more than 50 years, including work with the CBC radio and several other private radio and television stations. He is currently involved with CJNU, Nostalgia Radio here in Winnipeg, including doing a regular history feature. He's also a curator for a new digital museum dedicated to the history of radio in Manitoba. Where is that?
It's all online. Yeah.
Okay.
It's online. Just go to radio.ca.
Okay.
Yeah, WinnipegRadio.ca.
He has served as a correspondent for Maclean's Magazine, a contributor to Time Magazine, a broadcasting instructor at Red River College. Gary has written extensively about the early days of radio broadcasting in Manitoba, including a book titled On the Air, The Golden Age of Manitoba Radio. With that, Gary.
Well, thanks very much. It's okay if I just sit down. It's a small room. I think it'll work out pretty well. And thank you for inviting me once again. I've spoken to this group quite a number of times now, and I always really enjoy coming out and chatting with you. And when John called, I said, "Gosh, I'm not exactly sure if I've got anything to contribute anymore." We've covered an awful lot of history about ham radio and amateur radio in Manitoba over the years. So I guess that's my way of saying, I hope I don't bore you too badly tonight in going over some of these stories that I think some of you anyway might have heard before. I certainly hope not anyway. The presentation is titled Amateur Radio More Than Just a Hobby. And what I'm going to try to do is just a series of historical stories about amateur radio in Winnipeg and in Manitoba, and the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club, which was the forerunner to the organization today. Now, I think every person in this room knows that amateur radio has been a key communications component during any number of occasions in the history of our province, not the least of which was that amateur radio operators were absolutely instrumental in bringing commercial radio to Manitoba. You know, we couldn't have done it without you. I've worked in commercial radio my entire life, so I can say that without equivocation. But I've talked about that stuff before, so I'm just going to touch on it very, very briefly tonight, and then chat about hopefully a host of other stories that amateur radio operators have been involved with over the years. Now, I thought nothing starts a meeting off better with a group of ham radio operators than a little dose of opera. So, Andy, if you're ready, let's give it a listen. Okay, what you just heard, ladies and gentlemen, was a short portion of the very first piece of recorded music that ever went out over the airwaves in Manitoba. And believe it or not, there is some documentation for this, courtesy of a man called George F. Reynolds, a longtime member of the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club. And the selection from the opera Carmen by Bizet, that's what you heard. I believe it's called Toreador, the Bullfighter. Honest to God, I know nothing about opera, but it was just happened to be the first piece of music that went out. And how many people actually heard that opera is not certain. Probably not very many, because there weren't many radio receivers out way back in the year 1921 when the broadcast actually occurred. And a small group of high school students were behind it all, and they were members of the Kelvin Amateur Radio Club, experimenting with a brand new technology called wireless. Everything that's old is new again. But they were experimenting with this technology called wireless, and the high school, as it turned out, had been given a radio telephone transmitter left over from the First World War that had just ended. And the school apparently also had a hand-wound Victrola phonograph. I actually seen one of those at one point, but they only had one record. And that was a well-used recording, apparently, of Toreador from the opera Carmen. So the students warmed up the Marconi transmitter, wound up the phonograph, held a makeshift microphone in front of the record player, and sent Bizet's music out over the airwaves. Very first recorded music ever heard in Manitoba. So if you're ever running a trivia contest, it's a good question, because you probably stump just about everybody. But in all seriousness, one cannot begin to underestimate the importance of amateur radio and the role that ham operators played in the development of commercial radio in this province. And it's not just me saying that. In fact, one of the country's foremost broadcasting historians, her name is Dr. Mary Vipon. She's now retired from McGill University. And I'm just going to read just a very short little quote of what she said about the role of amateur radio operators in the development of radio. She says they formed the nucleus of the first broadcasting audience spreading the news of its delights and marvels. And they were the first experts teaching those only interested in listening to build and operate new equipment. They worked in radio shops, factories, radio stations, as well as they provided their expertise to early retailers, manufacturers, and broadcasters. They were an essential ingredient in the mix for the takeoff of broadcasting as a popular medium. So that is what Dr. Vipon had to say. So right off the bat, the organization has a long, proud history. But to get us going tonight, to get us started, I'm actually going to go back a couple of years before that Kelvin broadcast from Kelvin High School. And as you are very much aware that the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club dates back to 1919, what's that make it, 106 years old, somewhere in that area. And again, according to historian and amateur radio operator George Reynolds, the club initially was made up mostly of young men who had been signaling operators during the First World War. And of course, the war had just ended about a year earlier. Now, the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club had been formed in March, but by May of that year, the city was, of course, in turmoil with the Winnipeg general strike. Workers had left their jobs in virtually every industry, and some city and business leaders feared that this was the beginning of a revolution and an effort to overthrow the government, and on and on and on. And among the first group of workers to go out were telephone operators, and then the telegraph operators, and then the workers at the Free Press newspaper. And for all intents and purposes, the city was completely isolated. There was no independent communication whatsoever. Now, over at the Winnipeg Free Press, all-knowing editor John Dafoe was just about going crazy over all this. His newspaper was shut down, and no one in Winnipeg really knew what was going on, and no one outside the city knew what was happening in good old Winnipeg. So what happened next is really, really, really interesting. Somebody convinced Dafoe that there may be a way to connect with the outside world. We're talking about 1919 now. And I don't know who put the idea in his head. I have my suspicions. I think it was likely Graham Spry, who was a member of the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club and well known to Dafoe. And he, of course, Spry was later a well-known advocate for the formation of the CBC. But in any event, the solution to Dafoe's problem may have been something called wireless telegraphy, something that was very new, extremely new, virtually no, well, not virtually no, there was no commercial use whatsoever. Now, I'd really like to know what all the details and intrigue and everything else that went into this, but unfortunately, we do not. But the one thing we do know that was there were 3 amateur radio operators. One of them at least was a member of the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club, and they snuck up on top of the Winnipeg Free Press building on Carleton Street, and they set up a tower in the middle of the night. They got their wireless equipment set up, and they started sending and receiving telegraph signals to different places in the United States and in Canada. And they were able to report that Winnipeg was still standing, and they collected news stories and weather reports and little bits of pieces of information. And from this, the few remaining people that were at the Winnipeg Free Press managed to cobble together a 4-page newspaper right in the middle of the Winnipeg general strike. It was really the only independent information that anybody was getting. And anybody who studied or even read about the Winnipeg general strike certainly knows that emotions were running very high. And eventually, there was significant violence near the end of it all. And all of the stuff that was going on at the Free Press at the time was done in utmost secrecy, tremendous secrecy. And there was a couple of reasons for that. For one thing, the Free Press had no license to operate a wireless system or a telegraph system or anything like that. So what they were doing was technically illegal, but a more important aspect was these 3 young amateur radio operators would have been considered strike breakers. They were considered strike breakers. And there were most certainly people running around who would have done them great harm. To put it bluntly, some people would have kicked the shit out of them if they could ever got a hold of them at that point in time. And for that reason, their names were kept secret for almost 4 or 5 decades. No one ever actually came out and said publicly. I'm sure there's people knew who they were, but no one ever came out and said publicly who these guys were, simply because they were fearing for their safety. And what's also really interesting, if you read John Defoe's biography, if you read his own autobiography, anything that he's written, never once does he ever mention what happened during the Winnipeg General Strike and how they got that newspaper on the air with the help of the amateur radio operators. The work of the radio operators did have a lasting effect, however, as some of you well know, because for years and years after that, John Defoe made space in the Free Press building for the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club to hold its regular meetings, and I believe that lasted really right up until the 1960s. I stand to be corrected.
Late 60s, possibly early 70s.
Early 70s. Okay, well that's good to know.
Maybe that ended with the newspaper moving out.
I'm not sure about that. Yeah, that I'm not certain.
The newspaper moved long after that.
Fair enough.
Now, it was not until 1980, their good friend George Reynolds, as I said, another longtime member of the club, 4E4 or VE4VU, that was his call sign. He revealed who the three men were who pulled all of this off, and their names were Douglas Chapman, Don Turner, and Greg Hutchison. That's for their names. And if you're interested in finding out more about all this, all you have to do is go to the March 8th, 1980 edition of the Winnipeg Free Press, and you'll find a story about it in there. Now, a second story involving the Amateur Radio Club, and we'll fast forward now to the year 1922. And again, Defoe and the publishers of all the newspapers in Winnipeg had a problem. There was a shortage of newsprint, and none of the Winnipeg newspapers had enough paper to put out a daily paper. It was as simple as all that. There was some sort of issue. I'm not sure if it was labor or if it was technical or whatever the case may be at the Fort Francis paper mill that supplied them all. So once again, enter our good old friend Graham Spry, who is now the secretary of the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club and also editor of the University of Manitoba newspaper. And he thought, well, we've got a newspaper here. I'm putting out the Manitoban, and we use a different kind of paper. And I'm not sure what it was, but they used a different kind of paper than what the dailies did. And he decided that he would turn the Manitoban into Winnipeg's daily newspaper, at least until things in Fort Francis finally got all straightened out. And that's exactly what he did. He called on his friend Doug Chapman. The guy had been involved in the general strike stuff over at the Free Press, and Chapman again got on his radio, and he started getting information from different places in Canada and the United States and weather and stuff like that. And of course, the Manitoban already had a whole army of student reporters. So what they did is they went out, and for about 4 or 5 days, the Manitoban was indeed Winnipeg's daily newspaper. They published 26,000 copies a day and sold them for 5 cents a piece. And in an editorial after it was all over, Spry personally thanked Chapman for all the work that he had done in gathering news from around the country and around the world. And again, it was the radio hams that made it all happen. Now, in 1922, something else happened the same year, which was a fairly big deal for amateur radio operators and commercial radio operators too. Eaton's department store decided to establish their very own radio department. There was a man called Lynn Salton behind it all. And guess who he hired as his first employee, and that was our good friend George Reynolds from the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club. So we'll let Reynolds tell the story himself.
The man that started the radio department was a gentleman named Lynn Salton. He had previously gone on the air with his own broadcasting station, CKZC, from his home on Grosvenor Avenue in February 1922. When Eaton's decided to start a radio section in their store, Salton was the only qualified radio engineer in the city, and they hired him to take charge of their radio department. In fact, I was the first clerk that Salton hired when they started the radio department.
That comes from the CBC, an interview that the CBC did with George Reynolds in the 1980s at some point in time. And of course, the significance of starting an Eaton's radio department was that amateur radio operators in particular no longer had to use the mail order system to get bits and pieces of equipment, and they could buy them right here at home. And that first radio department, of course, eventually evolved into the television department. And the department even sold a few computers, I guess, before Eaton's finally shut down in the year 1999. Now, my next story along the way is going to be one that we jump ahead all the way to the year 1949. And the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club had gotten itself into a great big mess. And really, it was a problem that had been building throughout the 1930s and well into the 40s. And the public was mad at them. Commercial radio broadcasters were mad at them. There was threats of legal action. And as I said, it was just a great big schmozzle. It was a mess. And the issue was this. There had been a number of complaints from people listening to commercial radio that right in the middle of a program, they would suddenly start hearing an amateur radio operator talking to somebody somewhere else in the world. And for example, a listener might be listening to Fibber McGee or Molly or The Shadow or something like that, some of those great old classical radio programs, and suddenly the show would be disrupted with interference from a signal from an amateur radio operator. And I can't begin to explain how you guys know way more about it than I ever will. How a signal could get out of whack that far, but it actually did. So the club set up a technical committee to work with the district radio inspector at the time to try to deal with this problem. Monitoring sets were established to try to zero in on the operators that were causing the interference. One of the club's members also gave a talk on how to build a poor man's, how do you say this, oscilloscope, so they could gauge where the signal was going. And all of this was done, and right now I'm going to quote directly from the Winnipeg Free Press, in the hopes that it would preclude legal action being taken against the club by the Department of Transportation. So what that tells me was that this was a pretty serious situation back in 1949. Now, having said all that, it seems to me that the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club, all of their hard work must have paid off because and got the problem under control, because I just couldn't find any more references to problems after that 1949 story. So good on them. Again, if you wish to follow up on this, it's the February 2nd edition of the Free Press, 1949, and page number 8. Moving on, yet another story. The Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club was a pretty good public relations organization at certain points in time as well. And I'm going to stop right here and just explain a little bit. As you've already mentioned, I do a little history feature every day on CJNU radio. And this was one that I actually put together for the radio station. And it's about Winnipeg's 75th anniversary celebrations. And rather than me talking for a little bit, I'm going to let you listen to the little piece I did on the air.
From the CJNU History Vault, 1949. The city of Winnipeg was about to celebrate its 75th anniversary. News of the event was spreading around the world, literally, thanks to the efforts of a local advertising group and the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club. Winnipeg was brimming with ham operators in the late 1940s, as many as 300 according to some estimates, plus many more in other parts of the province. At that time, when a ham or amateur radio operator got in touch with a news station, a confirmation card would be mailed to the location contacted. Cards usually contain the operator's call sign and information about the place where the card originated. With Winnipeg's big anniversary celebration coming up, the local Advertisers Association printed up hundreds of special confirmation cards describing Winnipeg's plans for the 75th anniversary event. Winnipeg ham radio operators then went to work, sometimes late into the night, contacting whoever they could, wherever they could. Once contact was made, out went a confirmation card inviting the recipient to Winnipeg's upcoming show. Ham operators were also urged to sign off their messages with, "Don't forget to come to Winnipeg June 3rd to 11th for the city's big birthday party." Did it work? Well, Winnipeg's 75th anniversary week did attract thousands of tourists. No less than 14 booths were set up to register out-of-town visitors. Hotel rooms were sold out, and the local economy got a boost. Local ham radio operators could claim at least some of the credit. Another moment in time from the CJNU History Vault. I'm Gary Moyer.
Yeah, kind of a neat little story, and also gives me a chance of shameless self-promotion, I guess. But that's the kind of stuff that I do on the radio, and I've done a couple of other pieces on the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club as well. Moving on now, I'd like to talk a little bit with a few anecdotes about the role that amateur radio operators have played in the area of civil defense. And certainly, as you all know, there have been a number of occasions where ham operators have been absolutely invaluable in times of floods and storms and fires, and really at any point where the public is facing danger. Now, in 1948, and I call this Manitoba's forgotten flood because nobody ever talks about it, but the Red River Valley was totally underwater, completely underwater. And there was also flooding in a number of other places in the province around Portage and Dauphin and the Assiniboine River at Brandon and the Souris River. And the floodwater, which I didn't realize till I was doing some research on this, actually came within 6 inches of a dike to protect the city of Winnipeg, 6 inches from the top of a dike that was to protect the city of Winnipeg. And in fact, low-lying parts of the city were indeed did suffer some flooding, but for Winnipeg, 1948 was a very, very, very close call. And just to give you some ideas to the magnitude of the 1948 flood, virtually all farmland in the Red River Basin was underwater. Cattle and horses had to be moved or were stranded on little islands of higher ground. Several thousand people had to be evacuated from the region. Patients from the Morris Hospital had to be moved to higher grounds at the Morris Hotel. And the water supply in Emerson ended up being completely contaminated. It was one of those cases of water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, I guess. But it was a very, very serious situation. Again, enter the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club. And a story, April 24th, 1948, in the Winnipeg Tribune tells us that on the previous night, the night before, two members of the Amateur Radio Club left for Emerson. Not sure how they got there. I assume it was boat, but anyway, they probably, almost certainly it was boat. And they had with them what was described as, and again, I'm quoting, a 250 watt phone plus an 80-meter transmitter receiver. The club members were a man called Alec Parmley and John Taylor, and they were to be part of an emergency network set up between Winnipeg and Emerson to try to keep the lines of communication open because everything was essentially shut down. Now, the Tribune also reported in that very same story that a network had been set up, an emergency network had been set up in Winnipeg in the event that serious flooding occurred, and it was made up of 4 club members as well. And according to that account, the network would operate on the 80-meter band. That's what they were saying. And of course, they got through 1948, but it turned out to be just a warm-up of what was to come 2 years later in the great 1950 flood that would devastate Winnipeg and the Red River Valley, and hammer operators would be back at work very, very hard again. And suffice to say that the Winnipeg Amateur Radio Club and ham operators played a very, very important role in civil defense on any number of occasions. I could probably spend a whole evening just talking about areas where they helped out during floods, fires, snowstorms, you name it. Now, to conclude, I am just going to play you another short piece of audio going back to Canada's centennial year, 1967.
The city of Caracas digs out after 3 earthquakes ripped through the capital. At least 47 known dead and more than 1,500 injured. The nighttime tremors left a crazy quilt pattern of destruction and death in their wake. Parked cars were smashed by tons of debris. Many city residents quickly evacuated threatened apartment buildings. 3 days of official mourning are declared as rescue workers continue to sift through the wreckage, searching for victims. Catastrophe in Caracas.
So why am I playing you a news story about an earthquake in Caracas way back in 1967? Well, it just so happened that at the same time that earthquake hit, the Pan American Games were underway here in the city of Winnipeg. And among the participants was a full contingent of athletes from Venezuela. I think there were 98 of them in total, and also athletes from Colombia, because Colombia also suffered some damage from the earthquake as well. And quite naturally, these athletes were concerned about their family and loved ones back home, and communications were cut pretty severely in Caracas because of the earthquake. And from what I've done through my research, several amateur radio operators attempted to make contact with Venezuela. Some of them did, but there was a language issue, so they couldn't really communicate. But there were a couple of local hams that did make contact. Their names were Alan Keitel and Ivan Moran. And Moran, I think, worked with the CBC at the time. And they were able to help a number of athletes find out about the folks back home and how much damage had actually occurred. And how they did this was that Moran connected with the ham operator in Caracas. And this particular individual, they gave him a number of names of people that the athletes had provided the ham operator here in Winnipeg. He gave them to the amateur radio operator in Caracas. And this poor guy, because television or because telephones were cut pretty much, had to go running around the city. But in the end, according to the newspaper account anyway, they were able to connect with the families of no less than 30 athletes here in Winnipeg. And one of the Venezuelan athletes actually got to talk to his father through the Winnipeg radio operators, amateur radio operators. So, and that was a really, really major earthquake. I think there was 300 people killed or something like that. So these are a few of the stories that I have. Some of the events in your history, I'm sure all of you know many more than I do. And I'm sure that all of you realized long before I ever got here tonight that radio, amateur radio was very much more than just a hobby, and I hope through the stories that I have told you tonight that that has reinforced that by just a little bit. You have a very proud history going forward. Thanks very much.
Anybody have any questions of Gary in his history?
One thing that I'd like to mention, and you're probably aware of this, but it was something very important to me back in 1978.
Okay.
A lot of hams, including a number here in Winnipeg, used to phone patches for Canadian military.
Okay.
So when I was in Egypt, we were looking $3 a minute, or pardon me, $8 a minute to phone Canada, and we're limited to 3 minutes, if they could get through.
Right.
Phone patches to Ham, and then wherever in Canada they do the long distance call. For me, it was lucky it was Winnipeg. And don't ask me who was in Winnipeg, because I don't remember back then. I remember some of the hams in other cities let's say, to spend my spare time in the ham shack doing some of the paperwork. But, that carried on till quite recent years. Egypt, Cyprus, the Golan Heights. That's the last place I used a ham radio operator or use ham radio to talk to. But that's what got me interested in the hobby.
Okay,
Communications up to alert, that was another one. And there was actually military postings for members of the Canadian Armed Forces, and didn't matter what trade you were, to the different places to do the amateur radio. And in most cases, they used their own call sign if they were in another country. Like when I was in Egypt, we were first VE6 BGU portable SU, and then he was replaced by Harry Vaughn, who was VE1. I can't remember Harry's call sign. But it was very, very important, and for morale, it was very, very important. And there was a lot of traffic went through, people finding out about birth of children, passing anniversaries, and we used to go off to the CFARS frequency before the towns were allowed into the CFARS frequency and do flower. One of the guys in Ottawa had to deal with the florist. He'd order flowers for somebody, and we would send him the money order, which would take to the florist to pay for them. And like I say, for morale, for UN troops, or like I say, alert or wherever, it was very, very important. And again, that was a military posting as a ham radio operator.
fabulous. Yeah, great story. That's a good story. I might do a history ball on that. Thank you.
Anybody else?
There's a note, there's been a newer ham who's doing his PhD at University of Manitoba about researching northern Manitoba. Yeah, he's online. Yeah, exactly. And he's doing research of some earlier communications in Manitoba. So what you're saying is sort of falls into line too.
Yeah.
He's doing that too.
Kitty
So
corn. Oh, that's great. That's fabulous.
Jordan, the JLB that's online there. I'm sure he'd probably love to talk to you more. about
Yeah,
that.
well, that's great. Yeah, I'd love to.
Jordan,
Anytime.
you want to say anything about your project you're doing?
Hey, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Moyer, for that presentation. That was phenomenal, just fantastic. And thanks for the Radio Amateurs in Manitoba for putting this on. Gary, I really love that presentation. I guess my only question I do right now is, do you have anything published online about what you kind of spoke to tonight? Or is it better for me to just email you and try to get you out for a coffee or something?
Yeah, the best bet would be to just get a hold. I think John has my email address. I've got this radio history what do you call it, website, but there's not a lot on there that sort of was talked about tonight. So your best bet is to get a hold of me. Yeah.
Yep. Anyway, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
They can feel free to email me, V4IM, I'm on QRZ. If you want my emails in there, get a hold of me and I'll pass on Gary's email to you.
Affirmative.
Jordan, you can email to the info at RAC or the info at ramb.ca, and we'll make sure it gets passed over to John and or Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One interesting thing, Gary, you're talking about Ivan Warren. So my call sign is V4IM. He was a previous holder of my call.
Oh, was he? Okay.
Yeah, he was also a president of work at one time or another back in that era. 1970s, I guess it was.
Yeah, I had his. I think I had it here. Maybe I did. I thought I had Ivan's. Yeah. What did you say it was?
V4IM.
India White. He may have had a different call before that.
Maybe
Can't find. I thought I had it written down here, but oh, it doesn't matter. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah. So he was a member of the club too. It didn't say that in the paper newspaper article. Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Okay.
Thank you, Gary, for
you're very welcome.
coming out again and giving us
Andy.
You want to talk about certificate or anything?
I don't, was there the Maple Historical Society?
I beyond what I last sent to you, you haven't heard from them?
No.
That's crazy. I don't know. Like I'm no longer part of the society, and I thought that everything was in motion. So I'll check with
Okay.
I'll